Everybody seems to think that performing well under pressure when it matters is all about being in control of that situation. But I actually think that's wrong. I've come to believe that it's the opposite. Because when I started playing sport, I was terrified of having to perform under pressure when it mattered, when people were watching. I would physically shake from nerves before games, I would ruminate on all the mistakes I could make, and I would recede into myself and hide from the challenge. And at that time, I remember my mum would always say the same thing to me before games. And I never realized until now the actual profound wisdom in this sentence and how actually it encapsulates the whole message of this video. She used to say, "Joel, don't worry, because your body knows what to do." As it's my belief that the core reason we struggle to perform well under pressure in our lives is because we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust in our abilities, and actually we get in our own way. Let me give you a couple of examples from the real world. When you're doing well socially, right, there's no anxiety and you're not thinking about what other people are saying about you, you aren't consciously thinking about what to do or say next. You're in a state of social flow. Equally, when your mental health is in a good place, when the texture of your mind is smooth, you don't have to consciously think about your mental health because it is just functioning how it should be. Or when athletes perform in ways that most other people wouldn't think are possible, they don't have the time in that moment to think about how they do it. They just do it. Or when people do their best creative work, right? They're not thinking about each individual detail of that project. They just have a creative vision and they let their creative intuition flow through them. I think we do our best work, we showcase our skills most vibrantly, we perform at a peak level in all aspects of life, whatever we do, when the conscious you is not involved in the process, when we can get out our own way. And so my hypothesis for this video is this. Mastery is a process of making the conscious unconscious. Peak performance in any facet of life is about getting so good that there is so much trust in your abilities that you don't have to get involved in the process. When practice becomes pattern, pressure fades away. So I'm going to break down a 3-step process in order to understand and apply this idea, this hypothesis, to our everyday routines. So the first question is, what do you want to get good at? And I'm going to use myself as a case study here. I want to get good at my sport of wheelchair basketball, and I want to get good at the ability to articulate complex ideas and share their value with the world. And these are the 2 domains and facets of life that we're going to apply my hypothesis to. To make something unconscious, it first has to be trained consciously until it becomes an embodied pattern, and I'm going to explain how that works in the brain later on. But the first thing we have to do is identify what I'm calling high leverage behaviors, which are the things that truly move the needle in terms of making you better at the things that you care about. You might have heard of something called the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule, which basically suggests that 80% of the outcomes in the things we do are down to 20% of the inputs, right? And finding your high leverage behaviors, therefore, is about finding the all-powerful 20% of the things you could do that lead to 80% of the growth in the things that you care about and want to get good at. And through the process of thinking about and making this video, I've really tried to pin down a couple of principles to define what a high leverage behavior truly is. Firstly, I think it's the aspects of training and practice that are difficult or uncomfortable but have an obvious purpose. They're also the aspects of training and practice that most of your competitors won't do, likely because of the difficulty or discomfort. And lastly, they're the aspects of training or practice that can be measured objectively to track improvement. Let me give you 2 scenarios to show you exactly what I mean by these. Let's say I go to the basketball court to go and train, but I just push around casually, and I just put a couple of shots up, no real purpose behind it, just enjoying the process, not really even breaking a sweat, and I'm there for maybe an hour. Technically, I have practiced, I have trained, but compare that to going to the basketball court with a structured plan, right? And trying to make every drill that I do as game realistic as possible, doing aspects of conditioning to practice shooting under fatigue, or having a teammate shouting at me from across the court to simulate that game environment. Maybe creating pressure by taking points off my tally if I miss 2 in a row, and taking shots from specific offensive positions and tracking my scoring efficiency, etc., etc. You can see from those 2 examples how one is a low leverage behavior and how one is a high leverage behavior just on applying those 3 principles that I outlined previously. And this is an important starting point because how you train consciously makes up the patterns that become unconscious and are therefore the things that you rely on when the pressure's on and it's time to perform. And just as good habits can become second nature, so can bad ones. So firstly, identify your high leverage behaviors. Next, I want to talk about an idea that you may or may not have heard of, and it's called neuroplasticity. In layman's terms, what that basically means is that the brain is malleable. The biological structure of the brain can physically alter as a consequence of your experiences in the environment. For example, this paper found that during an intense learning period, there were significant increases in the grey matter of the posterior and lateral parietal cortices in students' brains. And this paper showed that taxi drivers have a significantly larger hippocampus than the average person. Hippocampus is a brain region associated with memory and spatial navigation. And there are also so many examples of this in sport, right? Black belts in karate show greater white matter in their primary motor cortex. And actually, this is the most interesting one to me, there is greater representation in the brain for the muscles in the hand of elite badminton players compared to casual badminton players, differences within the same sport. The list goes on and on with how neuroplasticity works and the research that's discovered it. But as much as the specific neurobiology of how this works is very interesting, it involves a lot of technical waffle and it's not necessarily relevant for the concept and the value of this video. For what we're trying to do here and the idea we're trying to break down, we're going to work with an overall assumption based on the research from neuroplasticity. And that assumption is this: what you train consciously becomes an embodied pattern due to physical changes in the brain. And therefore, commitment to the same high leverage behaviors over time rewires the brain, so the decisions, movement patterns, and technical skills involved in that behavior become so integrated into the neural pathways that they are able to happen automatically. Most of you watching, I assume, have learned how to drive, right? And when you're learning how to drive, you have to think very precisely about all the skills that you are learning. How and when to change gear, the sensitivity of the steering, how to orient the acceleration and brakes appropriately, how corners work, how roundabouts work, how to parallel park. It all requires so much thought. But drive every day for a year.
New York, New York.
And eventually you'll be able to do all those things whilst listening to your favorite song or having a deep conversation with a friend. It appears that you can do the things that required so much thought to learn initially automatically. And through our understanding of neuroplasticity, it's my belief that we can apply those same principles to the things we care about, to the high leverage behaviors that we're training on a regular basis. If I write every day about the topics that grip me intellectually, right, and I practice the ability to select appropriate vocabulary and put them in coherent sentences and structure them in a meaningful narrative, then eventually I'll be able to go through that process, whether it's verbally or written down, automatically. And the same thing can be applied to any physical skill that I'm trying to develop in basketball. So for whatever you want to get good at, whatever specific to your life and your adventure, the more you practice the high leverage behaviors, the stronger the pathways in your brain become, and the more you've made the conscious unconscious. Now, the third part of this process is the most important, as it justifies and brings together my whole hypothesis. The overall purpose of this video is to discuss and break down how we can perform well under pressure when it matters. And I think it's now all about getting out of our own way. Trust in your ability. Trust in your training and the work you've done. The conscious you now needs to let go and allow your skills and your intuition to flow through you. Just as the painter doesn't think about each individual detail of the painting, or as the athlete doesn't think about the finer details of his movements in the moment, get out of your own way, as this is where pressure fades away because practice has become pattern. Now, I understand that this is an odd, paradoxical way of looking at performance, but from my own experience, the less you think about what you need to do in the moments that matter, providing that you've done the hours of work required previously, the better you perform. Overthinking is a curse to performing well. We have to put all the overthinking, all the strategy, all the cognitive horsepower into training the patterns consciously that we can then rely on when it's crunch time. Because in 8 months' time, I'm probably going to have the opportunity to go to Brazil and compete in the Junior World Championships of my sport. And because of that, I'm going to apply the theory that I've discussed in this video into practice. I'm going to train super hard over the next few months. But then when we finally land in Sao Paulo in June next year, I'm going to let go and let the work I've done and the skills I've developed manifest through me almost automatically. Because 6 odd years ago, when I was bricking it before my first National League game in the lowest division of this country, I was given all the answers and all the wisdom to perform at a peak level. And it didn't come from a coach or a book or a motivational movie. It was my mum's simple truth that your body knows what to do. So your takeaway from this video can be summed up in 3 very simple points. Find your high leverage behaviors, commit to deliberate practice, then get out your own way. Thank you so much for watching.
Joel Clifton, yeah, please sub and comment and like. But on a serious note, the content is very good. It makes you think about yourself and your life differently.